So those of you who are joining us now, whether that's on Zoom or YouTube, we will start our session at 5:05, and that's only so that we can give more people time to join us, inshallah.
Sheikh, so to be clear, they're going to log in through Zoom, or are they going to go on YouTube and join us?
Both. So we will have many people on YouTube and many on Zoom. We have mentioned to students who really want to be more interactive to join us on Zoom. For those who want to just maybe type up messages, they can do that on YouTube as well. So we'll be looking at both. And there may be times where I'll stop you, where I'll think, if students may not have understood something, just to kind of elaborate further, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I like the fact that there's you can hopefully moderate the entire discussion.
Yeah, inshallah.
Cool. How's it going, Sheikh? Otherwise, you okay?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. Alhamdulillah. If you want to share a PowerPoint, you can do that. I've made you the co-host. So that's that as well. We're just sharing the link, Sheikh, with everyone.
Yeah. TYT, Sheikh. TYT.
Oh, TYT.
Yeah, take your time. TYT.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Man. Bismillah.
So Professor Shoaib, I think you would have received a YouTube link as well. I've sent it to you. And you could possibly keep it on mute in the background if you want to have direct access to the comments. That'll be there. Otherwise, I'll be looking at them anyway. So you don't need to worry about them too much.
So hang on, you're saying that I'm going to get sounds whenever somebody sends a message?
No, you won't. I can inform you, inshallah.
Right. Okay, cool. Bismillah. Just let me know when we can begin. Yeah, I think give it a couple more minutes, 2-3 minutes.
Yeah. Just 2 minutes, 2-3 minutes, and we can start.
So I don't really need a PowerPoint at this stage. I'm just going to hopefully go free flow, inshallah, on this.
Yep, absolutely. And also for those of you who are joining us right now on YouTube and on Zoom, this is an interactive session, so you can ask any questions. We'll wait for Professor to finish his point, and then we will ask him to respond, inshallah. And if you want to also come on camera, I can enable your camera. Just put it down on the chat, and I will do that as well. Because it's not a meeting, it's a webinar, so you will have to ask me first, and then I can enable your camera and everything else. So if you have a long question and you don't want to type it out, you're more than welcome to either use your mic or use your camera and your mic. And those of you who are joining us on YouTube, again, you're more than welcome to ask questions on YouTube. The more questions we have, the more people asking us questions on chat will be more useful for, I think, everyone, inshallah. So don't be afraid. If you have any kind of doubts, if you have any kind of questions in relation to evolution and Islam, this is your chance. This is your opportunity. We have the professor right here, well, in Dubai, but he's in lockdown and ready to take your questions, inshallah. So just give it another minute, and then inshallah we will go ahead.
Inshallah. By the way, you forgot to mention the most important thing, Sheikh. I'm surprised you no how do you feel? That's your motto,
Okay.
Sheikh.
Okay.
You forgot the most important thing that you should tell every potential person who might want to ask a question, Sheikh. Have you forgotten what it is?
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a stupid question. There's no such thing.
Oh, that'd be interesting. We're really going to test you today on that. I'm just going to get something important, Jeff, whilst you're waiting.
All right, sure.
So, Professor, can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, so I've got my buzzer here. Anytime you mention something that I feel our students might need a bit more elaboration on, you're going to hear this sound. Did you hear that?
Is that one of those you hit the cows that they make a sound?
Yeah, it's one of those buzzers. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so just to let everyone know that no animals will be harmed during this webinar.
All right. I am very, very style of your posters that you've made. Like
that's the power of
you've used or really welcome webinar. Yeah, I was just saying that, mashallah. So the actual photo of the guy looking through the microscope. How long did it take you to find this on Google? Because you said you found it on Google, right?
Yeah. Well, I had this before because when we were doing our FESP website, he's there as well on the FESP website. So so it may have taken me time before, but I can't remember how long it would have taken at that point.
Okay. For those of you who just joined in, just chill pill, relax. Inshallah, we'll get started. We're just giving just a few people some time. Mufti Halal, if you're watching, I think it's Mufti Halal. Likewise, good to see you, Mufti Halal. I had a chat with your Sheikh. I had a chat with the Sheikh Squared, the guy who's teaching you. The guy who's teaching you. I had a chat with him, and he was very surprised that I called him. I'm talking about the head of White Thread Institute. And he was a bit stumped why I called him. So he may kind of call you to ask, who am I, and all of that. So just be wary of that. I'll explain later. I told you Sheikh Squared. So this is your Sheikh, Mufti Halal. This is your Sheikh at White Thread Institute. Okay, that's funny. So it's Mufti Abdul Mangera. He I had a chat with him this morning, and I think I might have caught him off guard. But just call him, and I'll actually tell you why you need to speak to him. Oh man.
I think we'll give it a minute, and then we will start, inshallah, Sheikh. So
yeah, alhamdulillah. That's cool, man. That's cool. Absolutely cool. By the way, Sheikh, so for the YouTube, sorry, the Zoom, is everybody allowed to come to the Zoom, or the Zoom is only restricted for the students, right? And then the YouTube
Zoom is open. Zoom is for everyone as well. We've kept it open. We can have up to 500 participants on our Zoom webinar.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's a webinar. It's not a meeting. Therefore, we won't get people just jumping in and sharing their screen. It's restricted in that sense. So if anyone wants to come on camera to ask a question, you're more than welcome. You just need to put it down on chat, and I will enable your camera. So that's the only thing. So Zoom is open for everyone. You don't need to register. You just click on that link. And also at the same time, YouTube is open for everyone as well. You just need to ask the questions on there. I will also be looking at the questions on YouTube chat, so you don't need to worry if you can't see them. But if you can, that's even better.
I can't see them now.
So if you want to see them, all you got to do is on your phone, on your WhatsApp, click on the YouTube link, and then you'll be able to see them as well.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So on your WhatsApp, if you go there, that you'll be able to do that. Yeah, and just to let everyone know, the reason why we're waiting slightly longer here is because we really want people to benefit from this. We really want people to ask questions. If you're confused about anything, if you have any questions at all, like I said, this is our chance. And then, inshallah, this session will also continue over the next few weeks. I think we'll keep it broad because I think it's an important topic, and it's a topic whereby people kind of sometimes find themselves on the border between faith and rejecting faith. So that's where Dr. Shoaib comes in, or as it's written down, the professor comes in.
Sheikh, by the way, have you seen the recent series Money Heist?
Absolutely. I took your nasiha and your advice, and and I went with it, Sheikh, and hence your name, Sheikh.
Right. Okay. Because I was so surprised that the guy who's the central protagonist, he's called the professor.
Exactly. And so are you here.
That was so funny. Oh man, it's proper jokes.
Okay, Sheikh, so what I'm going to do now, I am going
Yep.
to put your camera back on the screen and you will be live, and we will take questions as they come, but feel free. I will remember, if you hear that, you've got to stop, and that means you'll need to just maybe explain a few things more. If anyone doesn't understand any part of what Dr. Shoaib is mentioning, please just put it down on chat. And if you want me to enable your mic or camera, just say it on the chat, okay, rather than put your hand up, because then I'll ask you, why have you put your hand up? And it'll just take extra time.
Sheikh, you're gonna put the YouTube questions on here as well, right? Because I can't multitask.
Yeah. So in regards to YouTube questions, I will say them out whenever we get the chance, inshallah.
All right. Okay. Cool.
Yep.
Right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. So first and foremost, welcome to everyone. Thank you for giving us your time and coming down to having a chat with us on Islam. As most of you know, one of the hottest topics, at least I feel, in the Muslim world, alongside other areas that I think need further discussion and investigation. But without a doubt, I think this is one of those controversial territories which really creates a lot of polarity. And individuals fall on every side and every single area of the spectrum. We have people who completely reject evolution. They want nothing to do with it. We have people who accept everything in evolution, which may have some problems with in terms of their theological or Islamic background. And there's some people in between who are kind of unsure. So given the variety of different opinions, in my own research, I've uncovered about 28 different opinions. What it inevitably shows is that the discussion is very much alive, kicking, and vibrant. And at the moment, there still doesn't seem to be an overall converging consensus amongst the specialists, amongst the ulama, which shows that I think that maybe we need to kind of really go about doing this more and more and more until it gets enough currency, academic currency and social currency, to be able to discuss it without having some kind of angering or intensive atmosphere. Because usually when you have conversations like these, you get a lot of sensitivities, that are hit upon, and the conversation becomes then more about anger management than actually getting the points across. So in my experience, I've been researching this area for now, I think 3 to 4 years. And I've learned a lot. I myself have been a student as I've been, trying to uncover different works, understand the complexities involved, the scientific complexities, the philosophical complexities, and then the hermeneutic complexities. And the conversation is really, personally speaking, it's a very difficult conversation to have. And the reason is because it's very interdisciplinary, right? By that I mean that the conversation forces you to go ahead and understand the science as best as you can, understand deep topics within philosophy and theology, and understand some of the complexities even with Quran, right? Now, this is a situation, at least from my experience, most of us in my circle, they don't fully understand Arabic. Even me, I'm still a student of Arabic, right? And as we approach the Quran, sometimes we have a very naive understanding because we don't understand the interpretive framework and how you should go about understanding a particular verse and hadiths and what have you. So in the absence of all of those interpretive tools, we get more confused than we get clarity. And what ends up happening is that we have to eventually rely on some kind of expert that we trust, that we believe in, to give us their opinion. And then it's up to us, in the absence of any critical information about what's happening in the interpretive process, whether we want to accept that opinion or not. And that's what happens for most lay people. And by lay people, I don't mean that as a negative term. All of us are experts on some territories and ignorant on others. So I'm a lay person when it comes to, for example, very crazy mathematics or civil engineering. I'm a lay person with respect to that, but I wouldn't say I'm a lay person in other territories, right? So that's what I mean by lay people in this context. Now, touching upon what Sheikh Hamid mentioned at the very beginning of the conversation is that it sometimes comes, yes?
Okay, so Professor, you've mentioned the word interpretation quite a few times.
Yes.
So in relation to approaching the Quran, what would you say to our students about what interpretation means? And when you have the Quran as a book, and then when you approach the Quran, trying to interpret what it means, could you put that in very simple terms, what it means?
Okay, so by interpretation of the Quran and Hadith, all I mean by that is whenever you read a verse and you want to make a judgment call about what that verse is trying to say, you have to be able to at least address a few questions to say that you've understood holistically. Okay, and by holistically, I mean that you have a good coverage of the topic before you can arrive at an educated opinion. So some of the things that you need to kind of filter out are what are some of the Arabic nuances that are happening within the verse? Is the word in past tense or present tense, because that makes an impact? Is the word talking about a ritual, some kind of aqidah point, or is it just a story that the Prophet ﷺ is being told to relate to the Muslim audience? When was it revealed? Who was it revealed to? What are the associated hadiths? Does this particular verse have any parallel in other parts of the Quran? So for example, the story of Adam, right? You know how Adam is created? That particular story is spread across the Quran in 7 different places. And on some occasions, the details are sometimes different. So how do you put them together and interpret that? That's what I mean by interpretation of the Quran in this regard. Does that help, Sheikh? Did I address your
I think
inquiry?
that should be fine, inshallah. If any students are still confused, do let us know, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Great, cool.
Jazakallah.
So as I was mentioning earlier, coming back to what Sheikh Khan mentioned in the very beginning, that some people go on the fence, that sometimes people see this as a binary. And what by binary, I mean they see this as a strict either believe in evolution and reject Islam, or believe in Islam and reject evolution. These are the only 2 options that generally people sometimes end up seeing. So what I'm trying to say is that this is the wrong way to look at the entire picture, because there are places in between where it does not require you to lose your faith, and nor does it necessarily require for you to reject evolution. Simplicity is usually masks a lot of the complexities that allow for much more space and oxygen for a healthy dialogue. And this is, I think, the first step in acknowledging that the debate is much more complicated than is usually thrown at us, particularly if you know the movement as New Atheism. So I'm including people like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett. These guys, wrote some books back in the early, about 15 years ago, and they pretty much use evolution as their ultimate gun in terms of saying that, religion is absolutely false because now we have evolution. So they're actually trying to force you to think that it's either evolution or religion, and that's a false setup. I think a couple of years ago, this is I think 5 years ago, I actually was called. I used to be in Nottingham, and I was called by a parent in London who said, "Shoaib, we have a problem. Our son left Islam because of evolution." So this was a call that I had from a parent directly. And when I spoke to the individual, his main things were, the science is absolutely correct. The Quran is, it completely contradicts the entire narrative. Therefore, I don't believe it anymore. And this is what happens to, I think, most of us, particularly in my personal background. When I was growing up, my education of Islam was minimal, absolutely minimal. Like I was told to just, recite the quls, just, your basic surahs, go to Jummah on Friday, and that's it. That was my quote unquote Islam. I didn't have any official training. I didn't have any proper madrasa like Fatima Elizabeth is doing right now. My education was nil, absolute nil. To the extent I did not know what the Bismillah meant until I was 21, and I'm 31 right now. So this is very recent. So for about 20% of my life, I didn't know even the basics of Islam. Okay, so and during that time, what happens is, of course, your most of your exposure is coming from school, and in school, science is a very, very heavy component. And so when people are so accustomed to thinking in scientific terms and a scientific makeup, what ends up happening is when you get confronted about certain ideas which don't match up with your religion, it's quite an easy move sometimes to dismiss the religion because that educational backbone isn't usually put in there. Now, of course, I'm not saying that this is applicable to all Muslims. I'm saying this based on my personal journey and just on my experience with meeting a lot of lay people, a lot of Muslims who are just, your average Muhammad on the ground. That's what I'm trying to say. So now that we've understood that this is a conversation that is so dynamic and it's so interdisciplinary, The problem is now, then how do you go about achieving a healthy conversation through which you can kind of say, okay, I now feel a little bit more comfortable with the discussion of evolution of Islam. This is where I want to try and get us at today. The first thing that I think we need to kind of address is that, first of all, get clarity on what the theory of evolution is. So let's just focus on the science right now. I think that's a very, very important thing, because usually a common trope that keeps coming up is that evolution means we come from monkeys. That's what evolution is usually described as, which is completely false. That's not what evolution says. Evolution is simply this idea that every single biological entity around you, be it us, monkeys, trees, birds and plants, all of these entities have come from a very long history, right? And as you go back in time, eventually we keep reaching a common ancestor that from which we branched off. So for example, consider your grandparents. Your grandparents came together, they had your parents had you, you're going to find a partner and you're going to have your own children, right? So that you keep on having this division and branching in your family tree. The same way, the same process is applicable to the entire biological kingdom. So when we say that we are related to things like apes and monkeys, we don't say we are derived from them. We're saying, biology says that there was a common ancestor, like your grandparent. There was a common ancestor through which the division between apes and humans started dividing. And that's what we mean by evolution. Sheikh, you're going to press the buzzer. Yes, I see it. You're going to press it.
How did you know that?
I saw it, Sheikh. I saw it. Tell me.
Okay. Right. So just to clarify now for our students in particular.
Yeah.
So when you're saying that we have a common ancestor, why just monkeys? Why not any other animal?
Right. Okay. So the reason why we are specifically closely related to the chimpanzees and the monkeys, etc., is because of several features, biological features, that allow us to be in proximity with them. So, for example, we have things like genetics that kind of indicate how close we are on the molecular level. So all of us.
So could you explain what genetics is like? Really break it down for our students.
Okay. Okay.
Level.
Yeah. So you guys have the right person to kind of keep me on guard and just kind of scrutinize me at every single word that I'm saying. So just like, okay, imagine we've all played Lego blocks, right? And using simple basic blocks, we can create a lot of fantastic structures like castles and cars and what have you. The same way, the human being or any other biological entity can be reduced. This is a very crude simplification, but just go with it. Reduced to the genetic material. And this is considered as our basic building blocks. This genetic material or these basic building blocks create the blueprint in how you are going to look like. So your genetics determine your height, your genetics determine your skin color, your hair color, to some extent your intelligence, right? What kind of physicality are you going to have? Are you more inclined towards being athletic or not, etc.? What kind of inherent diseases can you have? This is what we mean by genetics. So it's the basic building block of life that once is expressed on the full scale, like the Lego blocks and the things that you can create with it, that's what we mean by the genetic code, right? Now, so when we look at
our students, what you're trying to say is it's like small Lego blocks with certain kind of chemical ingredients put inside each block.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's exactly what I mean, right? So once we have that understanding, we can then actually see, okay, so if we look at the genetic material of human beings and we look at the genetic material of, say, chimps or apes or whatever have you, we can see that we can actually compare and contrast and come up with percentage similarities, right? So for example, just to make sure this is clear, say you and your friend have done a test, okay? And your friend got 90%, you got 95%. So that means that both of you are quite close in terms of your intelligence. You use a percentage to tell you that, right? Same way, you can use genetics to kind of compare the genetic material of your construct and the construct of apes and chimps. And because we have very similar genetic material, it is believed that we had a common ancestor that is closer to chimps. we also have similarity to other materials. For example, we have some similarities with fish, some similarities with flies, but the lower the percentage, the further back we have to go to find a common ancestor. What we mean by the genetic similarity is that our common ancestor through which we came out of, that makes chimps and apes our cousins, are much more closer in time. That's what we mean by similarity in this perspective. So hopefully that should be clear, right? That theory of evolution doesn't say we are a product of monkeys. Theory of evolution says that monkeys are our cousins and we had a common ancestor with them. Just like grandparents have parents and the parents have kids, that kind of process works even on the theory of evolution. So that's what we mean by evolution in a very broad sense, okay? Now, once the science is understood.
Yes, Professor Shoaib,
Yes.
just to try and clarify a bit more, you're saying like they're cousins. Are you saying that if if we were to go back, all the way back, from our parents to grandparents, and somewhere down the line, there's this one person or one individual, right, that is like the father of both? Is that what you're trying to say?
That's what I'm trying to say.
Could you explain that a bit more, how that might look like?
Oh, right. So, of course, when you look at us and say monkeys, for instance, or chimps, we know that our common ancestor should have had at least 2 legs and 2 arms, right? We know that because we have that similarity within us. That ancestor should have had that feature. Another thing is that entity should have also been able to stand on the 2 feet. So it should have been when you look at that entity, it should have been some kind of mix in between monkeys and human beings, but not exactly either of the two. When that shift happened, when that division happened, then the differences between us and chimps started to exponentially grow over time. And when I mean grow,
how long did that shift take place? How long?
I was just about to say that, Sheikh. I was just about to say that. So when we talk about change over time in evolution, we're not talking about 1 year. We're not talking about 70 years. Nor are we talking about 1,000s of years. We're talking about millions of years, right? So this is 1 with 6 zeros, millions of years. So the similarity between us and chimps, that division started, at least according to the approximate guesses that we have today, around 7 million years. So that's when we had our ancestor breakage between us and the chimps. So that's what we mean by evolution when it comes to human beings, right? So now that we've clarified this component, the other questions that come up out of evolution are more to do with interpretation of the mechanics involved. How do these mutations, because that's another big word that is thrown around in evolution, how do things change over time? So
Professor Shoaib, sorry to cut you out, but I think it's important. The one thing is, you are going to be explaining what mutations mean, what it might look like scientifically. But there's a question that's just come up on Zoom. I think I'll just throw that in there. You can answer whenever you think it's relevant. How does similar genetic material necessarily indicate common descent?
Okay, so
if you can explain that question in simplified terms and then answer it as well. Jazakallah.
Okay, so right. Okay, so here's. There are a couple of different ways to use this. I mean, metaphors are the best way to explain what we mean by genetic similarity, all right? So one of the metaphors that I've recently kind of devised to explain this concept is using the example of a teacher, a castle made out of Lego, and students, okay? Now, when you have a castle, the teacher says, right, each student form a line, and each student can go to the castle one by one, only one by one, and you are allowed to either add 1 Lego block or change 1 Lego block or remove 1 Lego block. Only 3 options: add, change, or remove, right? So now that's the stipulation that the teacher has imposed. Now, when the first student comes, she changes 1 block, the second student comes, etc. They do another, and at each interval, the teacher takes a photo. So we have some kind of historical record of how the castle is changing piece by piece, okay? So similarly here, when we look at the genetic material of us and apes and chimps and what have you, we can see some kind of gradual change where the mutations that so where the changes of the Lego blocks are happening in the teacher's example, the same kind of changes are happening on our genetic material, leading up to the genes of the human configuration. We can actually show that historically. So if you look at any biology evolution textbook, you can actually see from the orangutan there's a shift in the genes going up to the gorilla, and from the gorilla it goes up to the chimp, and then from the chimp it goes up to the human being. And what we expected to see in terms of those sequence changes, just like the castle when the students were changing one by one, we actually see a historical buildup directly towards the human genetic material. So I hope that makes sense, but that's the best way that I can explain it without actually touching the science. But similarity in this regard means that we have a historical sequence of the genetics, which we can see leading up to the human genetic material, which shows us that we did come from some kind of hominid or ape-like ancestry. Sheikh, did that answer? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that did. And if there's anyone who has further questions on that, they
Yep.
can continue doing that. But
Cool.
also, you were going to go on to mutations, I believe.
Right. Okay. So now the fundamental question is, well, okay, so you're saying that we come from chimps and what have you, and monkeys are cousins, but what does that mean? How do these things change? How do these changes come about? Well, I've kind of given the answer in the metaphor that I presented earlier. Over millions of years, whenever you have parents and they have kids, sometimes on the genetic level, the same genetic material doesn't get copied over to the kids, right? And that may be due to a host of reasons, but fundamentally, whenever there's a change on the genetic level, this is known as a mutation. Now, mutation can be one of three things. It can be a positive mutation, so a mutation that does good. It can be a negative mutation, a mutation that does bad. What I mean by bad is that particular mutation, that change in the genetic code, leads to some kind of disease or disability in the species. And there's also something called neutral mutation, which is when there's no effect. A change has occurred on the genetic material, but it has made no effect on the actual offspring. Now, when you have this change in material, in the genetic material, and mutations over several millions of years, eventually what starts happening is that even the physical structure ends up changing. Remember, I told you at the beginning that Lego blocks are the basic atoms of life, you can say, for all biological material. And if you change those Lego blocks, you can change what you can make. Similarly here, if you keep changing the genetic material enough, you can end up changing things from one kind of thing to another. So if you can master the genetic code enough, you can actually convert a bat or a fish to some kind of lizard. That's how we believe that the transition from sea life to land life occurred. You can actually see changes even in creatures that have no wings to eventually creatures having wings. All of that information is in the genetic material. And because of that genetic material and the mutations involved that are due to various factors, we eventually begin to see changes on the physical level. So mutation is a fundamental component in how species evolve over time. This is the main point here. Mutation is how species evolve over time. What are the causes of mutation? We don't need to worry about that. There's a host of factors that go into this conversation, but the key point is mutation lead to changes in species over time. Now, the part that really disturbs, a lot of Muslims, okay? Sheikh, yeah.
Before you go into that, we'll keep that as a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
I just want to add a few more questions which are relevant.
Yep.
There are many other questions that have come up, but I think I'm just going to pick the relevant ones to what you're talking about now.
Of course.
So I'll give you two of them, and then you can answer both together. So
Okay.
the one on Zoom by an anonymous attendee is, what is the difference between evolution and adaptation? That's one. So what's the difference between evolution and adaptation?
Okay.
And the second one on YouTube is from someone called Khan Akhlaq. Great talks, excellent. He said, maybe mutation in epigenetic levels, example at ACGT pairings or N2 levels. Please explain the possibles Question is based on idea told above.
Okay, so hang on. These are two indirect questions. Yeah. So can you first throw the first one at me?
Yep. The first one is, what is the difference between evolution and adaptation?
Okay.
So
Evolution
yeah.
is a theory that describes how species change over time. This is what evolution is. So if you want to know how we have this biological diversity, how we've had biological diversity over time, evolution tells you that. Adaptation is one of the resulting processes or resulting outputs of evolution. Now, evolution simply says is that when you have a particular environment, the animals that are most likely to survive are the ones that adapt to that particular locality. So, for example, if you have 20 species, if you have 20 different species in front of you, and you have an area where the trees are very long and the only food source is at the top where you have coconuts or whatever food substance that you have up there, right? Now, out of the 20 species, 3 have the climbing ability to be able to reach the top. That means eventually most of the population in that particular environment will be of those 3 species because of their climbing ability and to be able to get that food source. Eventually, given no other intrusions into the locality, all the species that cannot reach the length of the trees, they will eventually fade away or die out or just marginalize to a very low number. Okay, so when we mean by adaptation, we mean that the species that is best suited to live in that environment. And the example that I gave hopefully illustrates that. Is that okay, Sheikh? So did that answer the distinction between evolution and adaptation? Is that okay?
Yep. I think that's very, very clear. The
Okay.
second question, it's up to you if you want to answer it now or later.
Okay.
It's maybe mutation in epigenetic levels, example, ACGT pairings, or N2 levels. Please explain the possibles. Question is based on the idea told above.
So, okay, I don't know what the person means by possibles, but just to cut a long story short, so there is now to explain this to people, because epigenetics is not something that I mentioned before. So I'm trying to find a way how to explain this. So the way that we have our genetic material, okay, that is what gives us who we are. And eventually over time, genetic materials change, which leads to change in our physical structures. In between that, we have something called epigenetics, which are changes in how the way genes lead to the production of things that are necessary to build the rest of us. So for example, genes need to produce DNA. They need to produce other things, right? That kind of help us become who we are. Now, there's a debate amongst scientists right now in the process from the genes all the way up to building that entire structure, which is us on this physical level. In between that, after the genetics, what kind of mutations occur here? Now, this is a debate that is still happening and it's very live in the scientific conversation. For the purposes of this webinar, I don't want to go into the details because we're going to hit technicalities that are really not necessary for the resolution. But the person who asked that question, feel free to ask me later on, either on my Facebook or they can approach Sheikh Hamid. But one reference that I strongly recommend you'd read that I think is opening this conversation is a theory called the Extended Evolutionary Synthesis, EES, which basically says that the current evolution theory, not that it needs a massive revision, it's basically saying that there are a few things that it cannot explain, which maybe other things can explain. For example, epigenetics is one problem that evolution is facing. So I recommend you read through some of the literature produced by Massimo Pigliucci. He's one of the leading founders of the evolutionary extended synthesis. I'd also recommend the website The Third Way, which is also promoting this idea that it's not just genes that cause mutation. There are other levels of mutation that we just don't know about yet. And they hit on various other complex topics like plasticity, niche environment, and whatever have you. So that's for that particular individual. For the wider audience who didn't understand what I said, that's absolutely fine. You didn't need to know any of that for the purposes of this webinar. Is that okay, Sheikh?
That is perfect, Sheikh. Do carry on. Jazakallah.
Okay, so the other thing now that kind of confuses a lot of people is, or worries a lot of Muslims, is
sorry,
that
Sheikh,
now
you were gonna say something which I said there will be a cliffhanger. Is that what
Yes,
you're
that's
coming
what
back
I'm
to
going
now?
to. Yeah, that's
Perfect.
what I'm going
Okay.
to. Yeah. So one of the things that confuse or worry a lot of Muslims, once the science is kind of clarified, is the whole idea of chance. Because chance is a very important part of evolution. Now, why is chance such a worrying feature for Muslims? Well, do you remember when I said earlier on that mutations? There are only three kinds of mutations that are technically possible. There's a positive kind, so a mutation occurs on the genetic level or slash epigenetic level, which we don't need to worry about, but mutation occurs on the genetic level. And this mutation, if it's positive, it means it helps you physically to be able to adapt to your environment, right? A negative mutation means that it disables you or weakens you in terms of adapting to the environment. And finally, a neutral mutation. Now, because mutations can be either of those three, it can be either of those three. It's just your luck. It's coincidence. We don't know what species are going to pop out. It will completely depend on the kind of mutation that affects the final production of the offspring eventually over millions of years. So with enough time and enough mutations, you can get different species. So using a very famous evolutionary biologist, his name was Stephen Jay Gould. He said, if you rewind the tape of life and you let it play out again, you will see different structures to today. You will see different kind of animals to today because of the inherent openness of the mutation. It could lead you into various different kind of configurations. So that means that humans are just a lucky accident. Humans were not a necessary product out of evolution, right? So if you rewind the tape of life again, maybe humans never would have existed. Maybe dinosaurs would have never existed. Maybe other kinds of different species would have existed, right? So that openness in the mutation, and thus how the tape of life will play out, is what we refer to as chance. Now, when Muslims hear about this, in my humble experience, when Muslims hear about this, they go, they get very worried about this because this suggests to us that, hang on, does that mean God plays dice? Does that mean God doesn't know what he's doing? Right? Because this is the kind of questions that come out, and this is the kind of worries that I see in people's faces when I talk about evolution. Now, the problem here is, which you need to understand, is just because if evolution does play out in a chance-like way, it's an open structure. What I mean by that is we don't know which way things will work out, does not necessarily mean God doesn't know what he's doing. So for example, imagine that you have a coin, and when you toss that coin, you know that it'll have to be either heads or tails. But on a particular toss, you don't know what it's going to be because you don't have the absolute information of that entire system. But if you knew all the scientific information, for example, how the coin will be tossed, the forces that are going around the atoms, how they're sliding across the coin, anything that can affect the trajectory of the coin, if you have all that information, then you can definitively say, aha, it's going to be head on this one, it's going to be tails on this one, if you have all that information, right? So, but that is eventually, ultimately still, yes?
So just to give our students an idea,
Yeah.
do you think there might be a kind of machine in the future where if you click on the button and you toss a coin, and it can kind of sense, by looking at the force and the atoms and everything else, tell you maybe 2 seconds before the coin falls where it's going to be, whether heads or tails?
Never with absolute certainty, like maybe 99% certainty, because robots still have room for error, although very, very marginal in comparison to human beings. Yeah, but it's very possible for us to have higher accuracy than human beings. That's correct.
Okay, Jazakallah.
All right. So
just one thing I wanted to throw in. You can answer this later on. You don't have to answer it now. This is from Abdul Karim. Since information is non-material and in all observed cases always requires an intelligent sender, how did all the information contained in DNA originate?
Right. Okay. So the whole idea of how information came about, first of all, what do we mean by information on a biological level? That's a question to answer. But for the purposes of what I'm talking about now, information is not something I want to touch. For now, let's just leave that for now. I'm just dealing with the actual worries at the moment. That's my main concern. So coming back to what I was saying
Okay,
about.
I'm sorry, Sheikh.
Yep.
Just one more interesting thing, and again, it's up to you how you want to go about this. How can random genetic mutations produce a genital system for male and females?
Sorry, what?
How can random genetic mutations produce a genital system for male and females?
Right. Okay. So again, this assumes that chance-like structures happen like that, right? It or happens immediately. The key thing that you have to understand is that from a scientific level, the atoms work according to these laws that govern them. Okay, and when we put certain things together, they react and behave in certain ways. If you put nitrogen, carbon, oxygen, eventually you will get things like amino acids. When you have enough amino acids, you're going to get cells. And with enough time, like we're talking about, again, millions and millions of years, you will get the kind of designs or complexities that you see in structures today. Now, how the specifics of that will happen, you need to take a biology course. I am not going to be able to address that in a 2-minute conversation here. But in terms of whether it's possible, yes, we have scientific laws that govern how these things have come about. That's all I'm going to say for now. Is that okay, Sheikh?
Yeah, that's fine. And just another question: do scientists, have scientists ever observed that mutation leads to new species? I mean, is it empirical? Can you give us some examples to understand it better, if there is any?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So,
Mubin.
when we talk about species, right? So mutation, yes. Is it observable? Yes. On large parts, to observe change in species over time, this is beyond our observational span. What I mean by that is change in species happens over millions of years. We don't live even for a fraction of that. So just because we cannot see it doesn't mean it hasn't happened. Number one. Number two, however, we have been able to identify and infer change in species in the lab today. So there are some animals, bacteria and fruit flies and whatever, that have a quick offspring rate. What I mean by that, they populate very quickly. And because they populate very quickly, we can kind of keep on changing them until they're very different to one another. So I want to make sure this is understood cautiously. One of the markers to show that speciation has occurred, what I mean by speciation is that one parent species has led to two different species, that evolution has occurred, is when they can no longer mate with one another. So they can no longer have kids with one another. So just to kind of put this in an illustration, imagine you have some kind of animal, and over millions of years, eventually they have there's like let's just say something divided the initial population. This one went to this side of the planet, this one went to the other side of the planet. Eventually, because of the different environments that they will face, these two species that come about will be so different, and they will not be able to mate with one another, i.e. they will not be able to have kids because their genetic material has changed significantly. That is called speciation. Okay, that is called speciation, when they can no longer mate with one another. There are, of course, other kinds of speciations. We don't need to worry about that for now. I'm just making the conversation simple to get the point across. We have observed speciation in the lab today using certain fruit flies and bacteria. So is it empirical? Yes. Do we have evidence for it? Yes. Is that okay, Sheikh?
That is perfect. Jazakallah. Do carry on, Sheikh.
Okay. So I kind of lost the track. Where was I going with my initial point?
That is a good point, Sheikh.
Sheikh, maybe it might be better whenever I have a pause break, then put up the questions rather than spotting. Okay.
So if you can let me know whenever you want me to put up the questions.
Sure. So I think the point so the idea of chance, right? So when we come back to the analogy of the coin, so when we toss a particular coin, we don't know where the coin is going to land on a particular toss. That is quite obvious because we don't have all the information. Now that when we say, let's just say, for example, we got 10 heads in a row, we're going to call that luck because we didn't know how that happened, right? Now, that happened by luck, but from God's point of view, he was controlling everything all the time. So just because we have chance-like events in nature does not necessarily mean God doesn't know what he's doing. God can still make a world or a process through which we can see chance events, but this does not necessarily entail that he doesn't know what he's doing, right? So think of an animation. We all see animated movies, right? Now, animations are made by computer graphic designers. And if you see how they're made, basically they have time sequences. So in one time sequence, they draw something, in another time slot, they draw something else. So when you play them all together, it looks like a change in the character, right? Now, we have seen in cartoons, all of a sudden, pop, and an anchor comes out, or things just move in and out of like crazy. We see chaotic motion all the time, but that doesn't mean the programmer of that animation doesn't know what he's doing. Similarly, when we talk about chance-like processes, it doesn't necessarily mean God doesn't know what he's doing. This is one of those big points that I think worry a lot of Muslims. So, and I think it caused a lot of controversy. For example, recently, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, what he was trying to say in one of his videos is that he has no problem if the world is chancy and it shows like a trial and error process in nature. But people misunderstood him, and they thought that he was actually saying that God plays dice, that God doesn't know what he's doing. When in fact, he was simply saying that it's entirely possible for God to create nature in such a way where it seems chancy to us, but God still knows what he's doing, right? So I think that point needs to be clarified. The second, I think, kind of pivotal worry that people have, Muslims have with evolution, is the whole idea of that evolution is beneath us because we're humans, we're superior. God gave us nobility, God gave us dignity. And when we say, when scientists say that we come from evolution, they feel disgusted. They say, you think I'm related to a dog? You think I'm related to a monkey? Because usually these kinds of animals are like considered very, very beneath us. So in the Arab culture, for instance, when we talk about evolution, and when I tell some of my Arab students that, you know, we're related to dogs, being related to a dog is considered an insult in the Arab culture. I think even in the Pakistani and Indian culture as well. But because it's such an insulting thing, they reject evolution because of that reason. But that is not necessarily a valid reason to reject evolution. The sciences of evolution is crystal clear. Just because it hits some of your cultural sensitivities does not necessarily mean it becomes false. So those, I would say, are the two worries that I feel and I've encountered a lot when I talk to Muslims. So we've dealt with the science today. We've dealt with some of the emotional / philosophical concerns that come out of it. What I'll do next time, inshallah, is that I'll go over some of the problems that people have with evolution when it comes to Quran and Hadith. This in of itself is a whole discussion. So I think this is a good place to stop our webinar for today. So I'm just going to hand it over back to Sheikh Hamid for any questions that he may have, or from the audience that we can kind of go over.
Yes, of course, Sheikh. We will go to the questions. There are just a couple.
Yep.
Before we do that, because I interrupted quite a few times,
Yep.
could you, in maybe 3 minutes, give us a summary of what you mentioned today?
Yes.
Very quick summary from beginning till where we are now before we take the questions.
Right. Okay. So just to summarize what I said, there are 3 kinds of conversations that need to take place. One, understand. Sorry, hang on. Even before that, I have to mention something else. When people come to the discussion of Islam and evolution, most people do not necessarily have the background to be able to engage with this conversation, because the conversation is inherently very difficult. So what ends up happening is that because they are not experts in being able to understand what's going on, they have to rely on experts. And sometimes, in fact, on most occasions, these experts unfortunately have either one-sided views, either from the scientific side or from the theological side, that kind of skew the entire conversation, which ends up confusing more and more people. The idea here is that to make the conversation much more meaningful, we need to break down 3 layers of the discourse. The first layer is the scientific layer. The second layer is the philosophical or the Islamic or the metaphysical or theological layer. And the third one is the hermeneutics, okay? So first understand the science. What does the science of evolution say exactly? This is the first thing. The second thing, what can we accept from an Aqidah point of view? So we all, at least from Sunni Islam point of view, we believe that there's a borderline of things we can accept and things we cannot accept, right? So once you accepted those borders, what is it from evolution that we can accept, and what is it that we need to reject, okay? And finally, the third thing is Quran and Hadith. give us a certain narrative that seemed to indicate to us that Islam and evolution are incompatible. So once we've divided the conversation into these three fields and entertained each one, then we are able to enable ourselves to understand what we are able to say, aha, yes, that's fine, versus what we are not able to say, what we would say that's not, that is something we cannot accept. And what I've tried to do today is simply explain the science in very simple terms. This is, the science itself takes a whole semester, even a whole degree. I've just been able to simplify it to just a few minutes. Then I've tried to look at a few theological, philosophical implications. One was the argument of chance, that, oh, chance means that God doesn't know what he's doing. And the other thing that I looked at was the argument from emotional insult, that evolution, if true, how can I accept it when dogs are beneath me? So these were two arguments that I looked at. Are these the only philosophical arguments? No, there are a host of other issues. For example, evolution. Some people say that evolution means atheism, evolution means naturalism. I haven't touched that today. Inshallah, I'll touch that in the future. And I'll also be touching in the future the Quran and Hadith. That's where I left it off, Sheikh.
Jazakallah for that, Sheikh. It's been really, really illuminating. It's been really informative.
Sheikh, one person I think put his hand up.
Yeah, so the person who put his hand up, two people have put their hands up. So Imran Hussain, could you let us know why you've put your hand up? So is it you want to come on camera, or is there a question? So if you can put that down on the chat. Whilst we're waiting for Imran Hussain, I'll just quickly go to some of the comments on YouTube. So Sajid Riyasat said, most engaging.
Alhamdulillah, I'm glad. Yeah. Thank you very much for attending.
But I think Brother Sajid Riyasat mentions that under every post and almost every YouTube video.
Mashallah, he's a very respectful brother. Very respectful brother. Yes, I love his manners.
That's brilliant. Jazakallah for
Yeah.
So there's a question from Brother Sajid, and that is, it may not be directly related, but I'll still give it to you. It's up to you if you want to answer it now or leave it to later. To what extent would you say the Cambrian explosion is a stumbling block to the theory of evolution?
Okay, so for those people who, let me first explain what it is for those who don't know what we're talking about. So there's a point in time in the theory of evolution where we had very little life of life forms, right? So we had a few basic entities. All of a sudden, we had an explosion of the kind of animals and plant species that we see in the fossil record, right? By fossil record, I mean in the geological record where we find these bones and atoms, these bones and fossils, what have you. So that is known as the Cambrian explosion. And the reason why that's such a mystery from a scientific point of view is because it just happened all of a sudden within the span of evolution, right? Now, there are at least, from what I remember, 3 different theories of why that has occurred. With regards to the specific question of whether the Cambrian evolution undermines, the Cambrian explosion undermines evolution, I don't think it does. I think that there are very competitive theories out there that kind of explain why that explosion has occurred, but I feel in no way undermines the theory at all. I think that there are just a few things that they need to kind of address, but otherwise it makes no difference in the theory, in my humble opinion. Sheikh, your mic is on mute.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, so just the last couple of questions from TV Islam Science. Okay, is Salam dear all. Since some Muslims insist that a purely naturalistic neo-Darwinian view of evolution denies purpose in creation, do you think that teleological views of evolution involving ideas such as channeled randomness and convergence may be key area for future discussion?
Okay.
If you could simplify that maybe see how you want to answer it. It's down to you.
No, I need to explain what the person is saying. So
sure.
Can you say what were the terms that he or she used? Convergence?
So is it purely naturalistic? And in terms of neo-Darwinian view of evolution, do you think that teleological views of evolution involving ideas such as channeled randomness and convergence may be key area for future discussion?
Okay, so let me first make this clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a couple of different things infused in this question. Let me kind of unpack them and disentangle them, right? The first thing is naturalism. The whole idea that evolution is a naturalistic theory that kind of cuts off God from the equation, right? So that's the first thing. Now, naturalism is something that we deny. Muslims outrightly reject naturalism, right? We believe that there are things more than nature, for example, things like God, angels, and what have you. So that should be crystal clear.
Professor, could you explain to our younger viewers what naturalism is?
Yes, naturalism is simply the position where you believe that the only kind of things that exist are natural things. So there's no such thing as the soul. There's no such thing as things that are beyond physics, beyond time and space, like God. There are no such things as angels. Sheikh, your mic.
Sorry, yeah. So is it anything that you can't see, like angels and things like that?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's what naturalism means in this particular context. Okay. Now there is a distinction which is very important for Muslims. Again, I was going to do this next week, but I might as well tackle it here. There is a distinction in philosophy called philosophical naturalism versus methodological naturalism. Okay. So for those, this is not a technical discussion, so just relax. Yeah, I know these sound like big words. They're not big words at all. They're not big concepts. Philosophical naturalism is simply the position I just stated, that the only kinds of things that exist are natural things. Methodological naturalism, however, is a position that tells us that the only thing that science can do is tell us about the natural world. But anything beyond the natural world, it has to remain quiet because it is not designated for that purpose. So just to kind of make that clear, imagine you're a mathematician. Okay, just imagine you're a mathematician. I cannot use math, right, to talk about psychology. Psychology is not necessarily a mathematical enterprise. By the same token, I cannot use art to do engineering. In engineering, I need to do mathematics, but the way I do art, I cannot apply it in mathematics. What I'm trying to illustrate by these examples is that there are designated tools for each discipline. And there are some things which those tools can do, and there's some things that they cannot do. It is not in the remit of science to explain things that are supernatural by definition. This is my personal opinion. Yeah. So Muslims can comfortably understand evolution through the view of methodological naturalism. Again, which means that science only gives us the best description of the natural world, and it has nothing to say about the totality of things that exist, things like supernatural. It cannot entertain those discussions. So that we can accept, right? Now, I need Muslims to understand this, because this is something that I keep repeating again and again. To say that evolution should be rejected because it is inherently naturalistic is false, because we accept everything in science, but the moment evolution comes up, naturalism becomes an issue. If you want to reject evolution because it's naturalistic, then reject your mobile, because that runs on electrons, which no physicist in the world today has seen. Reject your computer laptop, which is based on scientific principles that are governed by natural laws. You have to reject everything. To reject evolution because it's quote unquote naturalistic, in the sense that we think that it gives us a natural explanation that has nothing to do with God, that is a very selective kind of criticism. So if you reject evolution simply because it's a natural explanation, then you have to reject everything else in science, which is incoherent. So we have to kind of be careful in not being inconsistent with our principles here. The other thing that the person mentioned is something known as teleology. Again, it sounds like a big word. It's not a big word. It's a very simple thing to explain. Teleology means ultimate explanations, right? So what I mean by that is, what is the purpose of your life? What is the purpose of your life, right? So for us, we believe that our purpose was to worship God. This is mentioned in the Quran. That is the reason why we have been created. That is an ultimate explanation. Now, to address the question of the individual, I have to introduce some technicality, right? Now, I mentioned to you earlier on that the process of evolution is entirely chancy. It's random, okay? Because mutations can be either positive, negative, or neutral. How they plan out, we don't know. We just don't know. Now, there are some developments in the science known as convergent evolution, which, to make a long story short, simply means that even if we rewind the tape of life, eventually we will see the same kind of traits and features in the different animals that may come up. So for example, the reason why they say that is if you look at the eye, for instance, the eye has come up in various different animals that are not necessarily connected on the evolutionary scale. Yet we see eyes almost ubiquitously everywhere. So, and what that means is that there are certain things that eventually do come up in evolutionary process. So another example could be, we should eventually see wings in some kind of creatures, because wings are necessary for flight to take off. We should be able to see that even if you rewinded the tape of life. That is known as, putting on long story short, convergence or parallel evolution, right? Now, does that indicate that maybe there is some kind of ultimate purpose? So there is a discussion in philosophy whether science can ever give us ultimate explanations. And in my personal opinion, science can never do that. The best thing that science can do is tell us, okay, look, there's some things in evolution that are not random. There are some things in evolution that are random. Now, just because we have non-random aspects of evolution does not necessarily mean that there is an ultimate purpose. Science is not in the business of giving us ultimate purposes. That is not its function. The purpose of science is to give us natural explanations of things. Ultimate purposes are beyond that scope. That is my personal opinion on the matter. God knows best. Wallahu alam. You're mute, Sheikh.
Jazakallah for breaking that down for us. So we want to go back to Imran Hussein, who had his hand up very patiently in the virtual world. So he's saying, if chance does not exist for Allah, then how chance or probabilistic nature of quantum mechanics exists for him? Sorry, I attended your theism and physics course and asked this question, but time was short to answer, and you had to leave answer if it was possible. So now, Sheikh, he's got you like a fish. So you need to answer this question.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know quantum mechanics, this is just a semi-explanation. Quantum mechanics is basically a theory that governs the microstructural world of electrons, quarks, and atoms, right? And there's some bizarre things about this. For example, things popping in and out of existence. And when we assign laws to this kind of behavior, we assign probabilistic laws. What I mean by that is, we can never say an atom is here or electron is here definitively. We say that it could be 30% here, 50% there, 20% here. We talk about these things much more probabilistically. Now, when this again, it has no impact on God, because God at every moment, from one moment to another, he could be popping those things in and out of existence. So there's no problem here. For him, he's controlling everything, while for us, it seems in a chance-like process. Again, the same issue with evolution, that just because it appears chancy to us does not mean he doesn't know what he's doing. If quantum mechanics also shows a similar structure of things appearing in and out, it doesn't mean God doesn't know what he's doing. The same principle applies here. Done.
That was very clear. Jazakallah for that, Sheikh. I hope, Imran Hussein, that your thirst has been quenched by that answer. There's another question here. Also, Mubin has his hand up. So Mubin, if you can type up your question. So we have an anonymous attendee who said, Sheikh, I don't know your position. Was Adam, peace be upon him, like us? Did Allah miraculously create Adam al-Islam and put him right at the point of human speciation, and only made it appear that we share common descent with other animals?
Okay, so hang on, Sheikh, can you do me a favor? Can you paste that question in the chat so I can see it? Because that was a pretty lengthy question.
Sheikh, you know, if you look down where it says Q&A, if you click on that, you'll be able to see it.
But I don't have Q&A.
Oh, you don't have Q&A, okay.
Because no, hang on, I do have Q&A. Okay. I see it now. Okay, Sheikh, I don't know your position. Was Adam like us? Did Allah miraculously create Adam? Okay, so what are the different solutions? I'm gonna leave this as a cliffhanger for next time, because I think that makes for an interesting conversation. But in my personal opinion, I don't think there is a problem with evolution. And I want to make this clear. from a Sunni Orthodox perspective, and by Sunni Orthodox, I mean you fall within the three broad schools that form our Aqidah. This includes the Athari school, this includes the Ash'ari school, this includes the Maturidi school. These are the three theological schools that define Sunni Islam. According to these, and I have nothing against people who are outsiders. I'm saying according to this is what I subscribe to. According to these three schools, there's nothing that lands you into rejecting evolution. What you have to reject, definitely, you have to reject that because of the scripture, is Adam was not a process of evolution. That point is crystal clear from the Quran. That has to be crystal clear. Now, whether that means every other human is not a process of evolution, that we'll discuss later on.
Okay, just a question has come from one of our parents. So I just want to prioritize that.
Yeah.
And that's from Ustada Aqifa, also a teacher. She says, Salams, how do living fossils stay unchanged over millions of years?
Okay, fossils, all right, okay. According to rules of chemistry of the fossils, right? Fossils need to be preserved in very particular environments, right? So they need to be completely covered in amber. That's one way of kind of preserving them. They need to be squished into a particular kind of soil that kind of protects them from biodegrading, right? By biodegrading, I simply mean if you throw something in the soil like banana peels, eventually that banana peel will just disappear because the soil just sucked it out, right? Now, fossils, because first of all, they're very dense materials, and also because they are able to survive over a long period of time in particular environments, they are able to get preserved, right? Under ashes and other different kind of materials. However, fossils are also biodegradable in other environments. So if they're underwater, for instance, they biodegrade very quickly. So that's why the whole idea that the fossil record, so for those of you who don't know what the fossil record is, as we uncover Earth, we find fossils. And the deeper we go, the deeper back in time we go. That's what I mean by the fossil record. So the deeper down Earth you go, the older the early and back in time you go. And so that when we look at the fossil record, sometimes there are gaps in the fossil record because the fossils from that particular time wasn't preserved. So not all fossils necessarily get preserved. From the ones that we are able to find, luckily, they have been in the right conditions for us to find them. And that's based on the chemistry, but that's not necessarily the case all the time. And that's why critics of evolution say, aha, there are gaps in the fossil record, therefore evolution is false. Why that's incorrect, we'll inshallah look at next time, but I hope that answers your question.
Yes, Jazakallah Shaykh, because we've got a few more questions, we'll do like a quick fire round, so you can try and answer them within a minute kind of thing. So it'll be because you also have things to get on with as well. So I'm going to answer a question from Hikmah Education from Net. They've said, please ask my question. So I'll put that forward to you now.
What is the question?
The question is, what is your view, Haeckel biogenetic law? That law explains, okay, so he's saying that law explains that we follow evolutionary process of our ancestors during embryology.
Hang on, is he talking about the very fact in our early fetus development, we look the same? Is that what he's referring to?
We'll wait for Hikmah to explain that.
Okay.
But let's move on in the meantime. So Hikmah, if you can maybe phrase your question more clearly. Moving on to, we are going to also have Mubin on here. They want to actually ask you verbally, so we will enable the mic for them in a second. How do we know that, this is from Mehrab Ahmed, how do we know that things like dark matter are contingent and not necessary? They've used one of your favorite words, Sheikh.
Yeah, okay. This is, so I personally don't want to answer questions that are not relevant to Islam and evolution, mainly because I want to keep the resolution according to the webinar. We can have another webinar on dark matter and physics and what have you, but for now, let's just stick to the topic at hand.
Okay, so just to mention, Hikmah has gone back to, as I said, yes, what you were saying, that is the question.
Right, okay. So I personally don't know enough on that particular matter to answer your question. Whether we accept it or not, I don't think will make a difference. But what I can tell you is that the idea that the early fetus development has some similarity does lead us to believe that there is some kind of process that pretty much underlies all of us. Because if the initial fetus development is the same, and the only thing that starts changing is the eventual product afterwards, shows us and kind of indicates to us that they're governed by the same process. And there's a common ancestor that explains that better than just apparent creation.
Jazakallah for that, Sheikh. Moving on to the next one from Aman, which is right here. What are your thoughts on the book, What's with the Monkey Business?
I have never actually heard of that book, so I would love to know about the book. Who is it by? I've never heard of that book, or I may have heard of it, but I don't. By Dr. Rafakat Rashid. Oh, I didn't even know he wrote a book. This is Dr. Rafakat Rashid from Al Balagh Academy. This is that same individual.
It seems like it, Sheikh. So Aman, if you can let us know, maybe even give us a link or something like that, that would be great to help out with this, inshallah.
Yeah, I would love to read that. Yeah.
Just to move on to Imran Hussain. So does it mean that Allah is seeing electrons? I think he's trying to say.
Electron or elections?
Elections, but.
Okay, right. If Allah can see everything, He controls everything. He knows everything. Yes. So there is no doubt about that. He is Al-Qadir and He is Al-Alim. So.
Okay, so we're just going to move on to hopefully the last question I think we'll take, and that's going to be from Mubin. So Mubin, I will enable you to talk, so you can start asking your question, and I'm going to unmute your mic as well, so you're welcome to ask your question. Go for it, Mubin.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Assalamu alaikum. Okay, Professor, as you said that evolution suggests that we all the species came from a single common ancestor, and it is based on genetic similarities. So just because the genes are similar, how can we be certain that all the species came from a single ancestor, while it may be possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have created all the species with genetic similarities, and then all other life came. So is it's not possible?
Okay, good question. Number one, where is the verse in Quran and Hadith that all Adam was created instantaneously? That's the first
Professor
question.
Shoaib, can I just stop you? Could you rephrase that question for our younger viewers to explain to them what the Brother Mubin is saying?
Yes, so Brother Mubin is asking, so just because we have genetic similarities, why can we not just say that, okay, that's probable, that's one explanation. Can we not just say that God just created everything instantaneously? Can we say that's also probable? So is that right, Mubin? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So the first thing that I want to answer, just I'm not saying this is me answering a question. Where is the qat'i verse, the definitive verse that Allah states clearly that He created all creation in one instant? That's the first thing. Because this is what Christians say, and I understand why Christians say it, but what is the dalil for this in the Quran and Hadith? Number one. Number two, the point here is genetics is only one line of evidence. I only spoke about one line of evidence. In fact, there are 20 independent lines of evidence, fossil record, homology, etc. Now, when we have different lines of evidence that are pointing towards the same theory, then we have good enough basis to show that this narrative is true. Now, if you say, well, this principle doesn't necessarily mean that it's true, well, we use the same principle in usul al-hadith. When we have multiple ahadith that are weak individually, but they give us the same message, then it comes up to the status of Hasan, maybe even Sahih, depending on which hadith you're looking at. So if you reject evolution because of this, then you also have to reject usul al-hadith. That's my point. So my point here is be consistent in your principles. That is what I'm trying to say here. Did that help your question, Brother Mubin?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Okay.
And Brother Mubin, before you go, can I just ask you where you're tuning in from?
I'm from Bangladesh.
And you're talking from Mashallah.
Hang on, Mubin, is this the same Mubin from my class?
Yes.
Okay.
Cool. Mashallah. Jazakallah for joining us, and do spread the news as well. And I think we've come to a point where we need to wrap up, and to the point where I would definitely like to say Jazakallahu khairan to the professor for joining us, giving us his time, and sharing his ideas with us. And just to also mention that, these sessions, I think the purpose of these sessions is to give us a bit of understanding, is to maybe ignite something in our mind and hearts. They're not there to give you all the answers, because we will have to make some kind of effort ourselves as well, which would definitely mean picking up some books. And everyone's journey is different. Okay, if you want to get to the truth, there are many ways to get there, and everyone's journey is going to be different. So I think we need to, some of us may understand things quicker, some may need more time. So everyone needs to go on their own journey. However, these sessions are to give us, is to facilitate that journey, is to give us, they're like signposts, like go right or left, or go 100 miles down, and do whatever you have to do at that point. So these sessions are there to facilitate your journey. And following that, you and myself and everyone needs to make our own research, do our own findings as well. And I hope that in that regard, these sessions are helping you, showing you the way to do that, inshallah. So Jazakallahu khairan, Professor Shoaib. We will also see everyone else, inshallah, next week at the same time on Tuesday, 5 o'clock. There was a question which I will answer now. I think it was by Salah, that you want to stay tuned with us, and you want to be updated on anything we do. So just a quick point on that. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon. And that means whenever we're having any sessions, that will come on. And also in regards to this Science and Islam one, it's going to be every Tuesday at the same time. You have the link that you joined this session. You also have the YouTube link. Also, just to give you details, that Professor Shoaib is on Facebook. He is also doing almost every other day a session called Academic Access. And the point of these sessions are to talk to various academics all over the world and try and simplify their ideas and the messages that they are trying to give to the people, but on a very basic level for us. And you also have the chance to ask questions, and I think they're very, very useful and very, very helpful as well. So do look at that as well. You will know about our FESP project, so Fatima Elizabeth Islam Science Institute of Islam Science and Philosophy. Again, if you just type FEIISP on Google, the website will come up, and you, again, if you can subscribe to that YouTube channel as well, you will get updated for that as well. I hope I've answered that question. So Jazakallah Sheikh, and Jazakallah everyone else for joining us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.